all right. First of all, you may be seated. First of all, let me say thank you for coming out on a Father's Day to talk about issues that are very dear to us. One of the things that we're trying to do is to bring awareness not only to the gun violence that happens every single day, but to bring awareness to the educational system that's failing our children, bring awareness to the fact that every single day our young men are waking up with no place to go, no jobs, no community centers. Every day we're faced with traumatic experiences on the south sides of Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, not only on the south sides and west side, but wherever black and brown people live, they're experiencing some very difficult times right here in America. You can go from Baltimore to Detroit to Brooklyn to LA to Phoenix, and you'll see the same problems over and over and over again. And it's just my belief that in a nation as great as ours, we should not be faced with the same issues everywhere you see black and brown people. It just should not be. America is a great country, and we have to do everything we can to work together to make it the very best that it can possibly be. So with that said, our organization, Project Hood, we've invited all the presidential candidates, Democrats and Republicans, to come to the south side of Chicago and tell us, one, what they're going to do if they're elected president, but two, to give you an opportunity to voice your concerns, to have your voice heard. So today, not only are you going to hear from a potential president of the United States in Dr. Ben Carson, but I'm so grateful that he's going to take time out and he's going to answer questions from the audience at the end of his message. And so I think that's a courageous thing to do when you come to the south side of Chicago, because anything can jump off and any question can be thrown at you at any time. And so we're thankful and grateful today to not just have him, but we're grateful and thankful to have on the south side of Chicago his lovely wife as well. So what I want to do is bring to the stage and give him all the time that he needs. But I really want us, because we are appreciative, because we are grateful, and because we are a humble people on the south side of Chicago, I want us to give him a great big round of applause, because it takes a lot of courage to run for president of the United States. And he has accomplished so much. We can be up here all day just talking about his accomplishments, but I want to give him as much time as needed. But I do want us to just give him a great big standing ovation and let him know that we appreciate him being here on the south side. Dr. Ben Carson, 2016 potential president.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Candy and I are absolutely delighted to be here. And it looks like perhaps the rain's going to hold off, so this is wonderful. Now, it reminds me so much of some of the areas that I grew up in. And first, I just want to thank so many people who have engaged in prayer for my mother. You know, when I announced my candidacy, I had just heard that she was on her deathbed. And we went down to see her, all the kids, and you know, we started singing to her. My wife started playing the violin, and she actually opened her eyes and smiled a little bit. And everybody started praying for her, and now she's better than she's been in years. So that's great. We appreciate you. You know, my mother was someone who really thought a lot about education. She was one of 24 children, got married when she was 13, trying to escape a horrible environment in rural Tennessee. And she managed to cobble together up to a third grade education. And they escaped to Detroit. And she discovered some years later that my father was a bigamist, had another family. And that occasioned the divorce. But you know, she only had a third grade education, so she now had to take care of two young boys on her own with little or no education. And that was extraordinarily difficult. There was never money for anything. She worked very hard, getting up and leaving at 5 in the morning, getting back at midnight. And she really had a dream that somehow we would be able to get the education that she never got. And our environment was one that was very difficult. There was sirens and gangs, murders. Both of my older cousins, who we adored, were killed. I saw people lying on the streets with bullet holes. Same thing that people see here in Chicago. But probably the thing that impressed me the most were the roaches. They had large, aggressive roaches. In the more upscale areas, they call them water bugs, but we knew what they were. Not only would they crawl on your table, they would crawl in your cereal box. So if you were eating Raisin Bran, you had to know what those brown things were. I shouldn't say that now that I sat on the catalog board for 18 years. And then the rats. The first time I saw one of those water rats, I thought it was a dog. The thing was so big, but they could jump like 5 feet in the air. And while we were there enjoying that environment, my mother was out working so hard. And her dream was somehow to be able to move back to Detroit from Boston. And after a couple of years, we were able to do that. And it was still a horrible environment, but at least she was independent. And I was a student, and I was probably the worst student you've ever seen in your life. I thought I was really stupid, and everybody else agreed with me. And although I did kind of admire the smart kids a little bit, there was one guy, he was the smartest kid in the class, and he knew it. He would always come up to you after a test and hold his paper in your face and say, "Look what I got, let me see yours, let me see yours." And you wanted to let him see it, all right, but you couldn't because you'd get in trouble. And the kind of student that I was reminds me a lot of some students that I encountered today, and more alarmingly of some of the adults that I encounter today, who don't spend a great deal of time educating themselves. And that is a problem because, you see, education is the great divide in America. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is or what your economic background is. If you get a good education, you write your own ticket. That's all there is to it. And nobody can take that away from you. And there were a lot of people who fought and died for the right of people to get an education, particularly black people. And now you got to drag people through the door to get the education. We have to really begin to emphasize that again. 20% or more of people who enter high school do not graduate. And this is the technological age, the information age. And we have got to begin to emphasize that to a much, much greater degree. Recognizing that the average person lives to be about 80 years old now. The first 20 to 25 years, you spend either preparing yourself or not preparing yourself. If you prepare yourself, you have 55 to 60 years to reap the benefits. If you don't prepare yourself, you have 55 to 60 years to suffer the consequences. And when you think about it that way, maybe the sacrifice that one puts into it early on is extremely well worth it. And the other thing about education is it allows you to be an informed individual. The people who founded this nation said that our freedom and our system is based upon a well-educated and informed populace. If they ever become other than that, the nature of the country will change. Why did they say that? Because people who are not informed are very easy to manipulate. You can tell them anything, and they say, "Oh, yeah, that's what he said. Okay, it must be right." Rather than actually having the wherewithal to analyze and to think for themselves. And that is such an important concept. If you don't take away anything else I said today, teaching our young people especially to think for themselves, not to let somebody else tell you how you're supposed to think, what you're supposed to do. It is not useful at all to do that. Well, my mother fully understood that, and she was so disappointed that I was doing so poorly and that my brother was doing poorly. And she didn't know what to do, so she prayed and she asked God to give her wisdom. And you know, that's the wonderful thing about God. You don't have to have a PhD to talk to him. You just have to have faith. And she believed that he would answer her prayer. And you know what? He gave her the wisdom. At least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was all that wise, but you know, it was to turn off the TV. And what kind of wisdom is that, we were thinking. And worse than that, to make us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Libraries every single week and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And she would put check marks and highlights and act like she was reading them, but she wasn't. And I was so unhappy. Everybody else was outside playing. I was stuck in the house reading books. And her friends were very critical of her. They said, "You can't make boys stay in the house reading books. They'll grow up and they'll hate you." And I would overhear them and I would say, "Mother, you know they're right." But it didn't matter. We still had to do it. And you know, back in those days, you actually had to do what your parents told you. You know, people ask me all the time, "Why did you do it?" You had to do it. There was no social psychologist saying, "Let the kid express themselves." So, you know, you had to do what you're supposed to do. But, you know, she didn't dictate what we had to read. And she let us read anything we wanted to read. And I remember one of the first books I read was a book called Up From Slavery. It was the autobiography of Booker T. Washington. And it was illegal for slaves to read. And it was illegal to teach them to read. And you know, and yet he taught himself to read, read everything he could get his hands on, became an advisor to 2 presidents. It was a very powerful story. But you know, the real powerful part of it is this. It was illegal for slaves to read. Why was it illegal for slaves to read? Because they knew that an educated man was a free man. And that's why I emphasize education so much, particularly to our young people today. Well, you know, as I started reading more and more books, I began to know things that nobody else knew. Within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all those students who were teasing me. I remember going up to Steve after a test, and I said, "Hey, Steve, how'd you do?" And he poked out his chest. He said, "Oh, I got a 91. I said, "Well, gee, that's too bad." "Oh, I got 100. And I said, "Next time if you need help, let me know." Now, that was probably kind of mean, but it sure felt good to say that to that turkey. But, you know, I had a different vision of who I was completely. And, you know, it says a lot about the kind of impression, the kind of vision that we must give to our young people. And particularly, you have to think about the young black males. It's been said that the young black male in America is an endangered species. Why do people say that? Because there are so many who are killed. And there are so many who are incarcerated. And it doesn't have to happen. You know, most people, particularly in the educational field, they know that young black males, kindergarten, first, second grade, they're just as good as all the other students. Cooperative, doing well. And as they get into the higher grades, something strange begins to happen. That peer pressure begins to kick in, that need to be cool. But I think one of the most detrimental things is when they open that American history book and they begin to learn about what a great nation this is, they don't see anybody who looks like them who made a big contribution. And then they say, well, next year, maybe when I take world history, but the same thing happens. Then they come home and they turn the TV on. Oh, there we are. Playing basketball, baseball, football, ramping in those baggy pants, acting a fool on some sitcom. And they get this impression that for them, that's what success is. They're going to be the next Michael Jordan or the next Puffy Daddy or something, you know? But it doesn't work that way. And, you know, what the media doesn't tell them is that only 7 in 1 million will make it as a starter in the NBA. That less than 1% of people who go to college on an athletic scholarship end up playing professional sports. That the average career span, if you are one of those less than 1%, is 3.5 years. And that they don't end up with glamorous lives. That part is not told. And what we need to start thinking about is how do we change that course? You know, you could take that little 6-year-old boy by the hand, anybody, from any ethnic background and walk down the streets of Chicago. And you could give him a black history lesson he would never forget. You could start by pointing to his shoes, and you could say it was Jan Matzliger, a black man who invented the automatic shoe lasting machine, revolutionized the shoe industry throughout the world. You step on that clean street and you tell him it was Charles Brooks, a black man who invented the street sweeper, those machines with the big brushes that come down the street. And you see a big refrigerated tractor trailer truck go down and tell him it was Frederick Jones, a black man who invented the refrigeration system for trucks, later adopted for airplanes, trains, boats. And it comes to a stop at the red light. You tell him it was Garrett Morgan, a black man who invented the traffic signal, and also how he invented the gas mask, saved lots of lives during the war. And while you talk about the war, you can talk about Henrietta Bradbury, a black woman who invented the underwater cannon, made it possible to launch torpedoes from submarines. And you'll see a beautiful black woman walking down the street. A black man did not invent her, but you can use that occasion to talk about Madam C.J. Walker, a black woman who invented cosmetic products for women of dark complexion, was the first woman of any nationality in America to become a millionaires on her own efforts. And then you can walk past the hospital and you can talk about Charles Drew and his contributions to blood banking, understanding the function of blood plasma. Daniel Hale Williams, the first successful open heart surgery in the world, had an operative mortality rate less than 1.5%. You look up at the surgical light, Thomas Edison. You didn't know he was black, did you? Well, he wasn't, but his right-hand man, Lewis Latimer, was. You can tell how Lewis Latimer made the filament that made the light bulb work for more than 2 or 3 days, invented the electric lamp, then pioneering work in incandescent lighting, diagrammed the telephone for Alexander Graham Bell, was an enormous inventor in his own right. Most people never heard of him. You walk past the railroad tracks, you can talk about Andrew Beard, the automatic railroad car coupler spurred on the Industrial Revolution. Elijah McCoy, the automatic lubrication system for locomotive engines. In fact, Elijah McCoy had so many great inventions, when something would come out, people would say, is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy? People don't even know where that term came from. And I'm just barely scratching the surface. So you see, that young man never had a reason to believe that his ancestors didn't play an important part in developing this nation, and that he isn't an integral part of that nation. But you know, here's what's really cool. I could take that same walk down the street for virtually any nationality in this country, and I could point out tremendous contributions that were made. You see, that's one of the reasons that this nation excelled to the pinnacle of the world faster than any other nation in history, because we had so many people with so much talent from so many backgrounds working on our problems. And can you imagine what can happen if we stop letting people divide us and we start working together? That will be a major coup. It's one of the reasons that my wife Candy and I started the Carson Scholars Fund, because we realized the importance of education. And we would go in these schools and we'd see all these trophies. All-state basketball, all-state wrestling, all-state this, that, and the other. What about the academic superstar? What did they get? Yeah. You know, a National Honor Society pin and a pat on the head. They're a little nerd. Nobody cared anything about them. That's why we're doing so poorly. If you look at the international surveys, particularly in the STEM areas, we are far, far behind. And we have to find a way to get around that. So we actually started giving out scholarships out of our own pocket to children starting in the 4th grade of all backgrounds for superior academic performance and demonstration of humanitarian qualities. They had to show that they cared about other people, because we're trying to develop the leaders of tomorrow, and we don't need people who are just smart. We also need people who care about other people. What a difference that makes. And you know, we started in Maryland, and the first year, 1996, we gave out 25 awards, one in each county. And this year, we gave out the 6,700th award, and we were in all 50 states. And the other part of the program is we put in reading rooms. And we put them in all over the country. We have several here in the Chicago area. We particularly target Title I schools, where a lot of the kids come from homes with no books, They go to schools with no library or poorly funded library. They're not likely to gain an appreciation of reading, and 70 to 80% of high school dropouts are functionally illiterate. But these rooms are places no little kid would pass up, and they get points for the number of books they read. They can trade them in for prizes. And in the beginning, they do it for the prizes, but it doesn't take long before that affects the trajectory of their academic performance and the way that they think about themselves. And this program, by the way, has won the Simon Award, which is a national philanthropic prize that's only given to one organization in the country each year. Comes with a check for $250,000, by the way. And the Ronald McDonald House Charity Award was only given to one organization in the country, also a six-figure check, and a number of other awards. But we don't do it for the awards, we do it for the effect, because teachers tell us we put a Carson Scholar in their classroom. In many cases, the GPA of the whole class goes up because now they have another role model. And this is what we have to start thinking about, putting the positive models out in front of our people. It will make all the difference in the world. The other thing that I think is vitally important, particularly when we look in the black neighborhoods around our country, and you see all the frustration, and you wonder, why is it a tinderbox? Why do people burn their own neighborhoods down? Why does all that happen? Because people are incredibly frustrated. And why are they so frustrated? Because there's no economic development going on. There's a lot of change, but there's not a lot of hope. And we have got to find a way to bring that hope back. And I think the way you bring it back is economically. Now, there's some things that I think could be done quite rapidly. For instance, there's over $2 trillion of corporate money sitting overseas right now. The reason it's not brought back here is because we have the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. Everybody agrees that it's too high, but is anybody doing anything about it? No. Our Secretary of Treasury says that American companies that do business overseas are unpatriotic because they're trying to escape American taxes. That shows how little he knows about business. People don't go into business to support the government. They go into business to make money. So if you really want to be smart as a government, you create an environment that is conducive to entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment. That's what drives the economic engine. And we can get an immediate boost by providing a 6-month tax-free holiday for corporate profits overseas. They can bring them back with no tax consequences. The only thing that I would stipulate is that 10% of what they brought back had to be used for the creation of jobs for people on welfare and unemployed and for job research. That would give you an immediate, tremendous stimulation, and it wouldn't cost American taxpayers one penny. Those are the kinds of things we have to start thinking about. And then we have to permanently lower the corporate tax rates. We have to fix the tax rates for everybody so that they're truly fair, equitable, and simple. The tax code right now is 80,000 pages long. It makes absolutely no sense. And we can do something that is much simpler, much flatter, much fairer, and that works for everybody, because that's the kind of thing that will really stimulate job growth. And you look at all the regulations. We have so many regulations now. And it's not that we don't need regulations. Our founders said if men were angels, no government and regulation would be needed. But we know men are not angels. Neither are women, for that matter. But the fact of the matter is, we do need some regulations, but not overburdening regulations. Almost everybody now has a gazillion regulations. I was talking to the American Bakers Association at their annual convention a few months ago, and I asked the leadership, are you guys being plagued by regulations? And they just laughed at me. They said, that's all we've been talking about. We can hardly get our jobs done. It was never intended that the government should be in every aspect of our lives. It was supposed to be here to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The people were supposed to be in charge. And that is what I am trying to bring back. I'm not a politician. not a politician at all. But I feel like I'm one of the people. I grew up in dire circumstances. I've been able to experience every economic level, from the lowest to the highest, understand how people feel in those different areas. And I don't believe that there's any cause for them to be enemies of each other. And we should not allow the purveyors of division to come along and stir up a war on women, race wars, income wars, age wars, religious wars, you name it, they're stirring up a war on it. And Jesus himself said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. It never has stood, it never will stand. We have to learn that we're all in the same boat. And if we're all in the same boat, if part of it goes down, the rest of it's going down too. We have to begin to understand how we invest in each other. Those are the programs that really work, the programs where people invest in each other. I was at a program not too long ago where prosperous businessmen, each one of them adopted a young man from the inner city who was on the wrong track. Not officially adopted him, but brought them into their world, showed them everything that was going on, taught them a lot, paid for their education in a private school, in a city where less than half of the kids graduate. Virtually all of those young men graduated, went on to college, and made something of themselves, not because somebody was throwing money at them, but because people were willing to get involved with other people. There was another program where it was a church-related group. They went out on the streets, they found people who were down and out, and they brought them in, cleaned them up, gave them new clothes, put them through a 13-week course free of charge to teach them the kind of responsibilities that are necessary to hold a job, help them find a job, talk to their employers, and in less than a year, 70% of those people were off the public dole and on their way. There was one young lady I talked to who was homeless and a drug addict when they found her. When I spoke to her, she was 3 months away from getting her PhD. I'm telling you, there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people and a lot of potential out there. And what we have to do is find ways to create a path where people can ascend the ladder of opportunity and get out of a state of dependency, not how we can keep them comfortable in a state of dependency, which a lot of people want to do. And we have to be smart enough to stop listening to those people. And also, in the black community, recognize that there is over $1 trillion worth of assets. And we have to learn how to turn our dollars over 2 or 3 times before sending them out. That's how you create wealth. And then you reach back and you pull the next guy up. And if you begin to do that, you will have plenty of opportunities, and you won't need to depend on anybody else. And then the other thing is to remember that there is a concerted effort by some people to keep black people separated. They'll try to hate on people like the pastor, who is absolutely a wonderful and courageous man, because he is teaching people to think for themselves and not to be manipulated. And that is the key. And I can tell you, when black people begin to grasp that message and make people fight for their vote rather than just sit and blindlessly follow somebody who says whatever they want to say, then you're going to have real power. And you need to have both parties fighting for your vote and looking for what's good for you. That is absolutely essential that we do that. But it's going to require courage, because people will ostracize you and they'll try to make you seem less than you are, and they make you want to shut up. But you know what? People fought for your freedom of speech and for your freedom of expression. And nobody should be able to silence you. And what's important is that we learn how to have rational and calm discussions. And just because somebody disagrees with you on something, that does not make them your enemy. And I always say, if two people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary. So we just have to really get over that and start having rational discussions with people. You know, I was engaged in a discussion, a public debate in Hollywood a few years back with a very famous atheist who believes that anybody who believes in God is an idiot. And he says, you know, no scientific person could possibly believe that God created us and created the earth. And at the end of that conversation, I said to him, well, you win because you've convinced me of your point of view. Because I believe I was created by God, and you believe you came from a monkey, and I tend to agree with you. But it is important to engage in discussion. It is very, very important. And then we need to ask ourselves, how can we be valuable? What is success? You know, in 1997, I was asked to come to South Africa to head up a team in an attempt to separate type 2 vertical craniopagus twins. Those are Siamese twins who are joined at the top of the head facing in opposite directions. And there have been 13 attempts to separate twins like that before, none of which had been successful. So I knew it was going to be a great medical challenge, but it was also going to be a great social challenge because it was going to be done at the Medical University of South Africa at Medunsa, the major black teaching hospital in South Africa, always the stepchild throughout apartheid and in the post-apartheid period. This was going to be their chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with Cape Town and Johannesburg and all the other great universities. And I just wasn't ready for all that social pressure, and I said, Lord, you know, more capable, smarter people than me have tried and have failed. You got to show me something here. And as I was studying their anatomy on our 3D computerized workbench, I noticed that the common drainage system that they shared was narrower centrally than it was peripherally. And the traditional neurosurgical literature says you should decide which twin to give the drainage system to, and then divide them over a course of 3 or 4 operations with weeks or months in between to allow collaterals and new vessels to form. Well, I felt that we could do it in one operation if we concentrated on where they were narrowing centrally. And I explained that to the team, and they said, you're the boss, we do whatever you want to do. Well, it was 2 days before New Year's of '98, big sign over the OR, God bless Joseph and Luca Banda. And they were having song service and prayer service. I was thrilled. I said, can we bring in a stereo to play inspirational music? 19 hours into the operation, we were only 3/4 of the way finished. The part that remained was so complex. The blood vessels were adhesed and gorged and tangled. It looked like spaghetti. It looked impossible. We stopped the operation. We went into conference. I suggested maybe we could cover the area over with skin and then come back in a few months, and they would have developed enough collaterals that we could cut through that area. And the doctors from Zambia, where the twins were from, and South Africa said, that's a great idea, and I know it would work at Johns Hopkins, but we don't have the ability to keep partially separated twins alive. They'll die. And now I really felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't have all my fancy equipment I have at Hopkins. I have my scalpel, my surgical loops, and a prayer on my lips. I said, Lord, it's up to you. I started cutting between those vessels that were so thin, you could see the anesthetic bubbles coursing through, just daring you to make a mistake. Make a long story short, when I made the last cut that separated those twins, over the stereo came the Hallelujah chorus. And everybody had goosebumps. And when we finished that operation, after 28 hours, one of the twins popped his eyes open, reached up for the endotracheal tube. By the time we got to the ICU, the other one did the same thing. Within 2 days, they were extubated. Within 3 days, they were eating. Within 2 weeks, they were crawling. And last month, they graduated from high school. But you know what? Thank you. That was not the success. The success you had to be there to witness was the reaction of the people. You see, this was done in their country, in their hospital. Their level of self-esteem was through the roof. They were literally dancing in the streets, and that is what real success is about. It is using the God-given talent you have to elevate other people. Thank you very much.
Come on, everybody, let's stand and give him the applause.
Okay, that one's not working. Come on up.
Good afternoon, Dr. Carson. My question is, what is your platform on the education for inner city children?
Okay, what is my platform for education of inner city children? Well, this is a very important question because studies have shown us that children who get the best education, who achieve at the highest levels, are homeschoolers, followed by private schoolers, followed by charter schoolers, followed by public schoolers. And what that means to me is that we should be providing a way for people to have choice when it comes to education. And I would be looking at a school voucher program that allows people to send their children where they want it to go. And I think that would incentivize a lot of our public schools to work harder to improve themselves, because it's absolutely essential. And you know, I remember one major city where it was determined that 8 of the public schools were absolutely inferior. The kids weren't learning anything, and they were going to shut them down and send them to other schools. And the politicians gathered around. They said, no, these are our schools, and we have a right for our kids to be here. And so they left the schools open, and the kids continued to fail. You know, we have got to be smarter than that, and we've got to figure out a way that we can get our children a good education. The other thing I just want to mention quickly is technology. There are computer programs that exist now that can look at the way a kid solves 5 algebra problems, and by looking at that, it knows what they don't know. And it can go back and tutor them on that, bring them up to speed at their own speed, which is the same thing a good algebra teacher can do, but the difference is the algebra teacher can only do it for one student at a time. Computer can do it for a whole class, for a whole school, for a whole city simultaneously. We have to begin to take advantage of that to get caught up. And also we can put the very best teachers in the world in front of 1 million students at a time instead of 30 using virtual reality techniques. Yes.
Hello. What is your plan for men and women who are incarcerated?
Okay, the question is, what is my plan for men and women who are incarcerated? We have a lot of people who are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes, and they get mandatory sentences. And the problem with that is not that they don't deserve some type of punishment. The problem is that is not the right kind of punishment, because those prisons tend to be universities for criminals. So you take somebody who really wasn't a criminal before, and you send them there, and they make all kind of connections, and things begin to happen, and then when they come out, you've got a very different situation. So obviously, we want to begin to look at other types of punishments and rehabilitation, because what is it really about? It's about rehabilitating people, because we need all of our people. We have 330 million people. China has over 1 billion. India has over 1 billion. And we've got to compete with them on the global stage. We need all of our people. Yes.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here, Mr. Carson. I want to know what are your plans to help create jobs in the inner city?
What are my plans to help create jobs in the inner city? Well, I gave you the jump start already, but the key thing is you have to understand that we in America possess the most powerful and dynamic economic engine the world has ever known. But we have suppressed it with all the regulations and with a tax structure that does not incentivize people. So we have to change those, because there are trillions of dollars sitting on the sideline just waiting to be invested. But people will not invest them when they don't see a friendly environment. So we have to create that friendly environment. That will make all the difference in the world. And I mentioned already how we get a jump start by requiring the corporations to get involved. The other thing we have to recognize, as I mentioned before, it's people getting involved with people. Business, industry, academia, churches, community groups have to be the ones who begin to invest in the people in their communities. There is precedence for this. In 2006, Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Prize for his micro lending program. Lifted millions of people out of poverty in Bangladesh and that part of the world, and 97+% of those people have paid those loans back. And I guarantee you we can do the same kinds of things here if we're willing to invest in our own people.
Good afternoon, Mr. Carson.
Yes.
My question is related to regulation or deregulation, I guess. It seems to me that the black community has been a victim of deregulation. And when you look at the mass media industrial complex, it seems like with deregulation, there has been a change in which how they project our community. Black people are projected as criminals and thugs, and it's a false reality. And research has determined that the media's projection of these images has an impact on behavior. What is it within your platform that will do something to change the way that the mass media is projecting the black community?
Well, it is unfortunate that the media does do that. I remember in the recent troubles in Baltimore, you know, there was so much emphasis on these horrible people and how they're burning up their own neighborhood and how they can't think and all this kind of stuff. But there wasn't that much emphasis the next day when hundreds of men from Baltimore came out and joined hands and separated the police lines from the trouble so that violence wouldn't occur. And not enough emphasis on the hundreds of people who came out with brooms and dustpans and mops and helped clean up the mess. Because the majority of people are reasonable people, but they don't get much attention. It's the ones who cause the trouble. Now, how do you get the media to stop doing that? Good luck, you know, because, you know, that's what sells. Carnage and discord and bad stuff, that's what sells. One of the things you can do is stop watching that kind of media. That would be one of the things. That would help them quite a bit.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming here. God bless you. So it's 2017, and we're looking at the beginning of the Carson presidency, Lord willing. There's interventionist way of thinking, there's isolationist. How would you go about tackling foreign policy?
Okay. Foreign policy, a very important issue right now. One of the reasons it is so important is because radical Islamic jihadists are trying to destroy us. They want to destroy us and our way of life. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. And they are growing rapidly. At the same time, our military is shrinking. Our Navy is at its smallest size since 1917. And recently, with all the problems going on in Yemen, when we were concerned about whether the Iranians would gain control there, and we sent a battle carrier group to Yemen, but it wasn't a fresh battle carrier group, it was the same battle carrier group that was supporting the efforts in Iraq. We used to have the ability to send a group here, and a group there. That means that we are in danger of becoming a regional naval force when we have global interest and we have people who are trying to destroy us. That means that we are going to have to change our policy. Now, remember in 2003, when we invaded Iraq, I was not for that at all. And I told President Bush that I wasn't for it. And we had many conversations about it. Because that was not, in my opinion, a global interest for us. This is a very different situation. This is of global interest for us because they will destroy us if we continue to ignore them and not take care of them. We have to destroy them first. That's all there is to it. And in terms of other types of foreign policy, you know, you look at the expansionist goals of somebody like Vladimir Putin. Look what he's doing. You know, in 2008, he invaded Georgia. I'm talking about Georgia over there, not Georgia over here. And he's still there. And then Crimea in 2013 and Eastern Ukraine. And you know, Ukraine used to be a nuclear-armed state. They got rid of their nuclear weapons because we said that if anybody attacked them, we would take care of it. Someone attacked them. Did we take care of it? No. Will we even give them offensive weapons? No. Now, what does that tell other people around the world when they look at us, when we have alliances with them? If we just walk away from our word like that, you know, that's something that really has to be addressed seriously. And as far as Putin is concerned, you know, what is his big stick? It is oil. It is energy. And he's made Europe dependent on him for energy. Well, guess who has more energy than he does? We do. Okay, so what we have to do is abolish our energy export rules that were put in place in the 70s when we did have a crisis. We don't need those anymore. And we have the ability to liquefy natural gas now, which means it can be exported, and we can make Europe and other parts of the world dependent on us for energy and put Putin back in his little box. And that's what we need to be thinking about, proactive rather than reactive foreign policy. There's a lot more, but I want to get to another question.
Dr. Carson, I am so looking forward to the debates and all of that heating up in the next year and a half. But I am also very concerned about the potential for deep disruption in our country, in our society. The possibility of not an ISIS attack, but coordinated multiple attacks,
Yes.
which I think they're planning. And maybe knocking out power grid.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a big EMP bomb. And then there is the currency issue that it will collapse. A very high possibility.
You're absolutely right.
And then there is the New World Order forces that are very in the background.
Yes.
And my question is this: do you think we will make it to the next election?
Well, the reason I would say yes to that question is because of God. And there are a lot of God-fearing Christians here. That's the only reason, though. You know, you mentioned a couple of things that are very concerning. You know, our financial situation. You know, we have an $18.4 trillion national debt. To pay back $18 trillion at a rate of $10 million a day, 365 days a year, would take over 5,000 years. And that's what we're putting on the back of our young people. That's the good news, okay? Because the fiscal gap is getting wider each year. The fiscal gap, we don't put it on paper. And so you don't get to hear about it. But it's what our federal government owes in terms of Social Security, in terms of Medicare, in terms of departmental expenses, all of these things, versus the receipts from taxes and other sources of revenue. And that gap is getting wider each year. Right now it stands at $211 trillion. That is unsustainable. And we're going to kill ourselves with that if we don't do something about it in the relatively near future. The last thing we can afford to be doing, and I'm a very compassionate person, is bringing people in here from south of the border and paying for them too. You know, all that is doing is exploding that gap, and we simply cannot do it because it will destroy us. And one of the first things that's going to have to be done in 2017 is addressing that issue. And some of the other things, I could talk all day about, you know, terrorist attacks and the things that they could do, but they might hear me, so I don't want them to get any ideas.
Dr. Carson, our country is messed up in so many ways. When you become president on January 20th, 2017, what will be the order of your short priority list?
Well, the first thing that I would do is call a joint session of Congress, and I would inform them that we have a new order of doing things, and that from now on we recognize that we work for the people, they don't work for us. And I'm gonna make sure that we get some things done that people have talked about, like a balanced budget amendment. We will not spend more than we take in. And one of the things that I personally want to do is I want to bring back to our military some of the retired generals, because we have some of the best military minds ever, but they've retired because they don't like Valerie Jarrett telling them what to do. But we got to get them back, and we've got to plan what we're going to do with those who are attempting to destroy our nation, because I do not believe we have a long period of time, and we have to be very, very serious about that. Yes.
I do appreciate Mr. Ben Carson taking all the questions. We're going to take 4 more, and then we're going to have to cut it.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Dr. Carson, for coming. What could be done to stop the rape in prison?
What could be done to stop rape in prison? I guess you could put everybody in their own separate cell and keep them separated, but you know, it's sort of like the question I was asked this morning on the news about the Confederate flag. You know, what should we do about the Confederate flag? And I said, you know, you could put up all the Confederate flags you want, or you can get rid of them all. It's not going to solve the problem. It has to be a change in the hearts of people. And what we need to bring back to this nation is moral courage and the principles and the values that used to characterize our society, which we're in the process of throwing away for the sake of political correctness. And we must bring a sense of God back to our country again. We can't allow him to be taken away from us.
Dr. Carson, it's an honor to meet you, and I can say right now you're going to get my vote. But speaking of that, kind of a lighthearted political question, would you consider Colonel Allen West as your Secretary of Defense?
I love Colonel Allen West. He is a very smart guy. Have you ever heard him talk? I mean, what person do you know who is so articulate and so knowledgeable? He's a friend of mine. You sit down and talk with him, he can just go through history like crazy of all kinds of things. I would be honored to have him be a part of the administration.
I don't want to be selfish, but I never had a photo with a president before. Is it possible?
Hey, it's okay with me. If you can get through these guys, it's good.
Okay, well, basically, I think the best question was saved for last, okay? The reason why I'm here, of course, is for the fathers, but it's also for Project Hood. What are you going to do if you become president? What he done sat on the rooftop, he done did, you know, pretty much everything to help this.
Mm-hmm.
What are you gonna do for here? This parking lot, this church, this community.
I'm glad you asked that.
Here, right now.
I'm glad you asked that question. Now, I answered it peripherally already, but basically, what you have to understand, and I'm going to I tell everybody the same thing, so I don't change my message because I'm in front of one audience versus a different audience, okay? If you look at the war on poverty in this country that has been conducted since the 60s, we have spent $19 trillion. What have we gotten? 10 times more people on food stamps, more poverty and welfare and out-of-wedlock births and crime and incarceration. Everything that was supposed to get better is not only worse, it's much worse. That is not the answer. The real answer is what I alluded to before, and that is incentivizing business, industry, academia, Wall Street, churches, community organizations to coordinate and invest in communities just like this one. So what this New Beginnings Church is doing, what I would do is coordinate with a number of different other organizations, private organizations, that can synergize what they're doing. Because the thing that will work in this country is people having relationships with other people. It's the relationships that fix things. It's not throwing arbitrary money at things. And we are our brother's keepers. And we will do everything in the government to facilitate the private sector taking care of each other and let the government take care of what the government is supposed to do. I think that's the kind of thing that will have a profound effect on this country, and there are a number of things that the government can do to facilitate private industry without getting involved itself, because one of the things that I've discovered as I've gone to Washington and I've lifted the hood of the engine and looked underneath, you want to slam it right back down, there is just so many relationships, corruption, special interest groups, waste, and graft. And the American people deserve better than that. And they deserve a government that works like a well-run business, not an inefficient behemoth. And by fixing that, believe me, there will be so much revenue for communities all over the country for things that we wish to do, and without jeopardizing the future of the next generation. And that is such an important thing for us to keep in mind. We have a responsibility to those who come behind us. Having grown up in Detroit, I'm very sensitive to this, because Detroit was once the most prosperous city in America, if not the world. And we stopped paying attention to those who were coming behind us. We start kicking the can down the road, and now it became the biggest bankruptcy in America. The same thing will happen to our country. The Lord is giving us a warning, a harbinger. We need to pay attention. Thank you very much.